Hello, everybody. Nurse Scott here. How are you? Welcome to the next installment of The Emergency Mind, the psychology of ED patients, families, and staff. I always trip over that line. I should have written a shorter title. This, of course, is the book I started writing 20 years ago when I was studying psychology and as an ER nurse of many years. But I never really finished, but the notes are going to be good for me to present in podcast form, a video podcast for most of you, because I have visual aids that will appear up here someplace. If you're listening to this as an audio-only podcast, I'll try to describe what we see. I think this chapter will be a little bit more difficult to describe the visual aids, so I apologize in advance for that. We continue with chapter 4, which I've entitled, Please Have a Seat. The waiting can be the hardest part. Mrs. Foster, when did you first notice that my triage interview of a newly arrived patient is interrupted by a loud voice? We need a doctor fast. A man, Brian, has rushed his wife, Laura, to my desk in a wheelchair. Calmly, I ask, what's going on? She's very sick. Hurry. I look down to see a slightly pale woman in her 20s in the wheelchair. What's wrong, Laura? I ask. I've been throwing up for 2 hours, she tells me. Isn't there a doctor around here? Brian shouts. I'm a nurse. Let me take a quick look, and we'll get her in to see a doctor as soon as we can, okay? Brian looks a little less anxious. You can help me by giving us some information on this form. When I finish the cursory examination, Laura appears in pretty good shape, uncomfortable with the nausea, but with normal vital signs and no underlying medical conditions. She does not have a life-threatening condition, and since the emergency department is very busy, she must wait. Brian is reluctant to take Laura to the waiting room, but finally complies. 15 minutes later, he returns to my desk. Calmly, he asks, do you know how much longer it will be? I can't say for sure. The average wait today has been about 2 hours, but things are starting to move a little faster. I've got her chart right here, and as soon as I can, I'll get her back there. He returns to Laura's side. 15 minutes after that, Brian returns. This is ridiculous, he yells. She's really sick. I do my best to reassure him. I know she feels really bad, but there are a lot of sick people here, some with serious conditions like heart attack and stroke. We're doing the best we can. So her condition isn't serious. How do you know? Are you a doctor? I want to talk to a supervisor, he demands. Now I'm frustrated. I'm trying to screen new patients as quickly and thoroughly as I can, and this guy has interrupted me twice. I want him to sit down and wait. I also want him not to worry too much. Now he's upset at me and nearly as agitated as when he came in. What can I say? Is there even any talking to him, or is he just a jerk? I consider calling security to keep him from interrupting me again. Is it fair to say most people do not like to wait? Yes. According to an Associated Press poll in 2006, people are generally willing to wait no more than 15 minutes in line and only 5 minutes on hold on the phone. And that's when they're not sick or in pain. The average time to see a physician in an emergency department is 59 minutes, and there are other periods of waiting while lab tests are run and an inpatient hospital bed becomes available. The insights of David Maister. Widely acknowledged as one of the world's leading authorities on management of professional service firms, David Maister wrote an insightful paper in 1985. His The Psychology of Waiting Lines gives us better understanding of the experience of waiting. While not based on formal research, his ideas are supported by the observations of countless managers of restaurants, businesses, and healthcare facilities. He and I both encourage further structured research to support his hypotheses. Here, we'll apply each of his observations to the emergency department, including how emergency departments often experience other stresses that make them less willing to wait. Maister offers two what he calls laws of service, the first of which is the following formula. S equals P minus E, where S is satisfaction, P is perception, and E is expectation. A person's satisfaction is the degree to which the perceived service meets or exceeds what they expected. The same can be said for the duration of a wait. In this formula, why do we use P for perception instead of, maybe A for actual wait time? Because several factors influence how long a wait feels to a person. More on this later. Without taking into account the way two people might perceive time passing differently as they wait, The following example illustrates Meister's first law. Two people who wait for 35 minutes will have very different levels of satisfaction. If one expected a wait time of only 10 minutes and the other expected an hour. So person one, assuming a patient perceives the actual passage of time it takes to be seen, the actual wait time, 35 minutes, exceeds the expected wait time of 10 minutes by 25 minutes. So satisfaction, S, is a negative number. Person two is satisfied. The actual wait time, that 35 minutes, is shorter by 25 minutes than expected wait time of 60 minutes. So S is a positive number, 25. To some degree, the E, the expectation, can be influenced. Often ED patients are told how long they can reasonably expect to wait. We give them an estimate thinking that knowing is better than not knowing. However, since the flow of patients through an emergency department is unpredictable, those wait times can be nearly impossible to estimate. Perhaps a lesson can be taken from some restaurants who routinely report longer than actually expected wait time, so that when diners are called to a table sooner, they're pleased to be getting in quote-unquote sooner. This is similar to the old customer satisfaction adage, under-promise and over-deliver. The second law of service is, it's hard to play catch-up. This restates the old maxim, you only get one chance to make a first impression. If a patient's experience starts out poorly, it's likely he'll remember this for the entire emergency department visit negatively. He'll remember the entire visit negatively. Conversely, if it begins well, that is, if the patient, by the patient feeling that she's being taken seriously and that staff are doing everything possible to help her, even if there are later frustrations, errors, or waiting, she's likely to recall the entire encounter positively. Beyond these two laws of service, Meister gives us 8 more observations about the experience of waiting. Let's look at each one as it applies to the emergency department. Number 1, occupied time feels shorter than unoccupied time. We know a watched pot never boils. The father of psychology, William James, put it this way: boredom results from being attentive to the passage of time itself. People perceive time as going by more quickly when they have something to do. Now, there are 2 conflicting recommendations regarding activities intended to fill time. On one hand, the activity should both offer some benefit in and of itself and be related in some way to the service the person is waiting for. On the other hand, it may be helpful to provide an activity that does not call attention to a potentially unpleasant upcoming experience, such as having blood drawn. The application to the ED waiting room seems clear. Offer patients something to occupy their time there. The system actually provides this to a small extent. There may be insurance forms to fill out at the registration desk while waiting for an available exam room. Visitors may need to move their vehicles from the front door to the parking lot. Most waiting rooms have televisions and magazines intended as distractions. The problem with offering other activities is that many patients are experiencing pain, nausea, or other discomfort that decreases their ability to concentrate on a time-consuming task. Number 2, people want to get started. Waiting for help to start is perceived as longer than waiting for this or that to happen once help has started. The challenge then is to make patients feel their care has begun, even if they've not yet been placed in an examination room. This also combats the common fear of being forgotten while waiting. In fact, some emergency departments have protocols in place that allow triage nurses to draw blood, send preliminary lab tests, order x-rays, or give pain medications without a physician's order. This can decrease overall time in the department, quickly relieve pain, a key component of ED patient satisfaction, and give a sense that care has already begun. Number 3, anxiety makes waits seem longer. In the emergency department, anxiety is a major theme. There is anxiety from the discomfort many patients feel, the unexpected disruption in their daily routines, the potential for death, and the financial cost of coming to the hospital, among others. Add to this the anxiety of wondering if you've been lost in the shuffle and you've got a wait that seems much longer than it really is. Information from registration clerks about insurance coverage and payment plans may allay some anxiety, or increase it. Reassurance by the triage nurse that a patient's condition does not appear to be life-threatening can do the same. Nevertheless, despite our best efforts, not all anxiety can be eliminated. Perhaps the most basic thing we can do is maintain a calm, helpful demeanor that projects a sense of calm to the emergency department patients and visitors. Number 4, uncertain waits are longer than known finite waits. We've all had the experience of being told that we'll have to wait X minutes and then while not wanting to wait, settling in for the required time, reading old magazines. Once we know what we're in for, we can more easily accept our fate. This is where emergency departments are at a distinct disadvantage. It can be helpful to hear, we're running about 20 minutes behind schedule, but there is no schedule here. Patients often ask, how many people are in front of me? The answer gives little information since patients that are more critical will be taken out of turn and bump other more stable patients. This is related to number 6 coming up. In addition, if the reported wait time or number of people ahead of you continues to change, patients can begin to feel as though they're not being dealt with honestly, undermining the trust which is essential to healthcare. So when the inevitable questions come, the best policy is for waiting room staff to briefly explain how the triage system works, apologize for not being able to give a more specific answer, and thank patients for their patience. It might be helpful to suggest a patient check with you again in 30 minutes for an update. While the situation will likely be unchanged, it gives the person a stepping stone. He or she can look forward to a definite point in time during the wait. This is counterproductive. It's counterproductive to try to give a hard and fast wait time when it's impossible to do so. 5. Unexplained waits are longer than explained waits. Perhaps it's a universal human need to know why. Maybe it's a facet of our culture. We Americans prefer to decide for ourselves what is reasonable instead of taking the word of some authority figure. This is also true while waiting. If we're forced to wait because staff are working lazily or not at all, we feel we're being treated unfairly. If we're waiting because there's a serious situation staff must attend to, we accept our destiny more easily. Not knowing at all simply leaves us feeling powerless. Rude and demanding patients and visitors are a challenge for ED personnel. It helps to understand the psychology behind such behavior. One of our basic psychological needs is to feel in control, or when we have lost control, such as when a procedure is being performed on us, to feel it's because we have voluntarily given up that control. It is the perception that a person is no longer in control of his fate that he becomes irritated and rude in order to once again reassert his or her control. I want to talk to your supervisor is a way of saying, I'm going to call the shots now. One way to help people maintain a sense of control is to offer them a reason for their wait. In the emergency department, there is a significant barrier to this. Often the justifiable explanation for a wait is that ED staff are occupied caring for many other patients who also need help, some in critical condition. People who are ill and/or in crisis tend toward a state of egocentrism. They focus more on themselves than they would normally and become unable to consider the needs of others. An extreme example of this comes from my own experience. An ED patient, Martin, wondered about his wait, either to be admitted or discharged. He called me over to ask an all too common question. What's taking so long? I explained the doctor and the nurse caring for him were both busy in another room with a patient who was not breathing. To this, Martin barked, I pay my bill like everybody else. In his state of helplessness, he had become too egocentric to empathize with another patient's plight. Number 6, unfair waits are longer than equitable waits. From elementary school, our culture teaches us how to line up and the hard and fast rule of no cutting in line. We carry this cultural norm throughout the rest of our lives. If you're in doubt about this, try going ahead of someone else in line at a grocery store and see what kind of reaction you get. Even if there is an unwanted wait, we can rest assured that we will be attended to in our rightful turn. To be cut in front of is justifiable grounds for anger in our culture. The good news is that most of the time this is not a problem. People patiently wait their turns at stores, restaurants, and DMV offices around the country. The bad news is emergency departments do not work that way. When ED resources, such as examination rooms or staff, are limited, patients with minor problems must never force those with serious conditions to wait. This is the basic principle behind the system known as triage. Patients are screened by a trained registered nurse and classified by the severity of their condition. This system saves lives. Unfortunately, it also frustrates those who rigidly adhere to the social norm of no cutting. Explaining the triage system to a patient may help lessen the assault on his or her sense of fairness, but as we mentioned earlier, patients in discomfort or crisis may not be able to comprehend and or appreciate the wisdom of this procedure. The sense of unfair treatment among some patients has led to a surprising behavior I call armchair triaging. Patients have actually come to my desk and complained, "The woman next to me just went in and I was here long before she was." And when I explained the triage concept, patients have actually told me, "She wasn't sicker than I am." I'm amazed that they have taken it upon themselves to evaluate the seriousness of other patients' illnesses. My response has been, and perhaps mistakenly, "You really don't know what's going on with that patient, and I'm not at liberty to discuss it with you." While true, more often than not, this only serves to upset the patient, who then lashes out, again, seeking control with, "Well, how do you know who is sicker?" And I've been tempted to explain that this is what I've been educated and trained to do, and that I've been doing it for many years. However, I know that this is not really a discussion about my clinical skills, but rather an expression of frustration. A better response acknowledges the patient's frustration with the system, even sympathizes with it, and reassures that he or she will indeed be cared for as soon as possible under the circumstances. Number 7, the more valuable the service, the longer a person will wait. Simply put, we'll wait longer to buy concert tickets than a pack of gum. You might think that there's nothing more important than emergency health care and that patients would be willing to wait any length of time for it. And indeed, many people do wait for long periods, if not begrudgingly. But as with anything, it's all about individual perception. At some point, every person must decide individually when it's just not worth it anymore. Some people do leave the emergency room before seeing a physician. Some to seek care at another hospital, some to call their private physicians, something perhaps they should have done in the first place, and others simply to go home and see if it goes away. Another aspect of this principle is that once a service is completed, waiting to leave can be just as intolerable as waiting for service to start. Often, the physician tells the patient, "Well, all your tests are normal. It looks like it's nothing serious. I'll write you a prescription and be sure to follow up with your doctor next week. The nurse will bring you your papers shortly." Then the nurse gets tied up with another patient. This wait from what the patient perceives as the end of the ED experience and when he or she can actually get dressed and leave can be frustrating. It improves patient satisfaction to discharge patients as promptly as we bring them in. Number 8, solo waits feel longer than group waits. Misery loves company. Social support is a universal psychological need. Support can come from those we know or even those we do not. ED patients who arrive with friends or family members have provided their own support for the unpleasant experience of waiting. It would be interesting to research the waiting experiences of patients who arrive alone compared to those with someone accompanying them. In non-healthcare situations, a certain camaraderie among those waiting can develop. People waiting for a delayed airline flight may begin to talk, comment on the wait, console each other, to commiserate. Less often this occurs in the ED waiting room. However, an example of how this can occur is the observation of a waiting room while a championship sports event is on TV. Sometimes people begin to cheer on their team, talk sports with each other as if they were gathered in someone's living room. This behavior serves 3 important psychological purposes. It involves patients in a distracting activity, as we've discussed, provides social support in an undesirable situation, and allows for social referencing. It's anxiety reducing to know that what we are experiencing is not unique. In fact, one way to help someone in crisis, as we discussed in a previous chapter, is to normalize the experience. Normalization can also be done through checking with others who are in the same situation, referred to as social referencing. So how long have you been waiting? It reassures people that they are not being singled out and treated unfairly. Implications for clinicians. To summarize, nurses and others who interact with people waiting for emergency medical care can help these patients tolerate their time in the waiting room by following a few simple recommendations. Remember, the nature of the patient's first contact with the ED will color their overall perception of the ED encounter. Maintain a calm, helpful demeanor which projects an anxiety-free atmosphere. Provide activities for patients to do while waiting. Begin patient's care in triage according to established protocols. Give patients a general idea of how serious or not their situation is. If appropriate, acknowledge the patient's discomfort, but explain that the condition is unlikely to become life-threatening and that help is forthcoming. Allow patients to contact employers and others to inform them that they will not be able to participate in planned activities. Avoid giving estimated wait times or how many patients are ahead of you, since this can change. Never allow patients to feel they're being lied to. Acknowledge patients' frustration. Thank patients for their patience. Briefly explain the triage process in simple terms. Realize rude patients are seeking control. Don't argue with them. Instead, empathize and explain why waiting is necessary. Reassure patients they've not been forgotten. Keep all explanations simple and brief. And in the treatment area, discharge patients promptly. So I hope that's been helpful. I think this is maybe one of the more practical chapters so far. We've gone over some concepts in psychology and how the ER works, and then this I think gives us some very practical advice on dealing with patients. And if you couldn't tell already, it really comes from a lot of experience I personally have had in the triage area. I love triage. I love being on my own. I'm kind of in charge. It's very autonomous. I enjoy that. Patients come in and I am the first person they see, and it's up to me to set the tone for the rest of their, not only to decide if they need to go back right away, how serious their condition is, and try to detect a medical emergency if one exists, but also kind of to set the tone for the rest of their stay and organize things so that everyone does, and keep checking the rooms to make sure that when one is open, that the patient is taken back promptly. I've always enjoyed that, but I've come across a lot of frustrations, as you could tell from some of those stories, but also come up with some ways I think are grounded in psychology of how to approach patients and make that experience easier for them, if that's at all possible. So thank you so much. I hope you got something out of this. Please give this video a like if you're watching this on video. Subscribe to the channel, ring the little bell. Thanks so much for joining me, and I will see you next time.